Thanks to Mantle Group, who are one of our sponsors. And it's Wednesday because of DevWorld. So thanks to all the DevWorld people that are here. It's great to have you along, and I hope you learned something from the amazing talks. In the spirit of reconciliation, Melbourne CocoaHeads acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people today. Now, as far as talks, tonight we have two lined up. First off, we have Andrew Murphy with The Power of Saying I Don't Know, which is, I'm really looking forward to it, so it should be good. And then afterwards we have Katie about Craft It, Code It, Conquer It, technical blogging hacks. So that should be really, really nice as well. So thanks to our speakers for making the time to come along this evening. As always, all of our events are covered by a code of conduct, which can be summarised briefly as above. If anyone has any questions, there is a URL there with a bit more details. If you need to speak to anyone, come find anyone that's one of the organisers or even myself, and we will help you out. I believe there's also an email address floating around somewhere. Yep, so if you want to remain anonymous, feel free to do that. Housekeeping, we are in a different venue tonight, so everything is out the doors and turn to your right. So just follow the corridor around and you'll see the bathrooms there. Otherwise, if you need to go to an emergency exit, it's out the doors and turn left. Yep, cool. The slides have been updated, so everything is good here. Name tags, it's great to see everyone putting name tags on this evening. Helps out when introducing yourself. Obviously, if you don't feel comfortable, that's perfectly okay. If you see anyone with a pin-on badge at the top, that is for the organisers of the event. Otherwise, if you're new and you feel okay saying, hey, this is my first event, there are blue badges available as well. Questions. So during the talks, we ask that there are no interruptions, and all questions are kept for afterwards. So there will be people wandering around with mics for those in person. Otherwise, if you're watching remote, please jump on to Slack and ask in the Melbourne Meetup channel. One of the MCs, so myself or Boc or Pat, will ask the questions on your behalf. As always, we can't do these events without our sponsors. Our gold sponsor for this year is Mantle Group, and thanks to them for providing the office space we are in tonight. Our silver sponsor is REA Group. They've been around for many, many years and always actively involved in CocoaHeads, so a big shout out to them as well. So, as well as the talks night, which is tonight, there are other activities that get run throughout the month. Next week we have the coding night. Now, next week is going to be a bit of a special one, so if you're a junior dev or someone who wants a bit of help with their resumes or just to get some good tips on how to get a job in this unfortunately bit tough job market at the moment, there will be someone from one of the HRs, Mantle Group's HR department there to give some advice and help on how to enter into the job market and do some reviews of resumes in order to help you stand out. There is also a social night which runs at the end of each month on the last Tuesday. This time it will be the 28th of May. Venue, time, all of that will be on Meetup as well as in Slack. There are other groups which run here in Australia and also over in New Zealand. There's Sydney CocoaHeads, and we do have a couple of Sydney people here this evening. There's also GDG Melbourne, and Katie, who will be talking later, is part of that group as well. And if you want to join our Slack, then there is a QR code there. Otherwise, aunz.cocoaheads.social will give you a lot of the details. How to find us, so Melbourne CocoaHeads specifically, there's the web, otherwise Slack via the QR code, or Mastodon if you're on that social network. If you're in Slack, then there are a range of different channels you can be a part of. There's the Meetup and volunteers, as well as jobs and speakers. As far as introductions go, that's all from me for the moment. We have Andrew up first with the power of saying, I don't know.
That sounded very nice on the microphone. The crisp sound of a can being opened. It's the best thing. Cool. Okay, so for those of you who haven't seen one of my other talks at CocoaHeads, I like to start them with a story that humiliates me. I do that for a few reasons. The main reason is when you look at all the research, people engage better with speakers who they can empathize with. And if I make myself look like a fool, hopefully you can empathize with me. The other reason is research also shows that those talks are the ones that are voted the highest. And the fact that this is my third time speaking at CocoaHeads probably means the theory is working. So I am not going to deviate from that. So this talk is about the power of saying, I don't know. I've been doing public speaking for about 6 years at this point, still relatively new to doing it. The first ever talk that I did is on YouTube. It's available. If you want to see it, you can see it. It's crap. But everybody starts somewhere. I did a lightning talk on Git commands that most people kind of don't use. Git bisect. If you've never seen Git bisect, go home and research it. It is amazing. That's not what this talk is about. But it was on those kinds of things, and it was a 50-minute lightning talk, and then I did a 40-minute kind of deeper talk. Yeah, sorry, I do tend to wander. We had this discussion. Then I kind of got into public speaking. I was starting to find my swing. I was speaking at conferences and meetups, and really enjoying it, and really kind of feeling like I was adding value, and feeling like people were kind of vibing with the way that I see the world, and the way that I think the world should be, which is kind of why anybody does speaking. It's we have opinions on things. We want to share those opinions. Of course, at the end of a lot of talks, there's a Q&A session. So there was me as a supposed expert, stood up on stage with my third ever talk that I ever did. Somebody asked me a question. I didn't know the answer to the question. What do you think I did? Here's a trick, it wasn't saying that. I bullshitted. I made something up. And I got away with it. And I did it again. And I got away with it again. And suddenly, I don't know why, I just had this realization that I shouldn't, why am I doing this? Why am I making stuff up? Who is this helping? It's not helping anybody. It's not helping the people that are watching me because they're gaining information that's wrong. It's not helping me because eventually I'm going to get found out. And so the next time I made myself a promise. The next time somebody asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to, I was just going to simply say, I don't know. And I did it. And you know what? Lightning didn't strike me, the ground didn't open. It went fine. It went more than fine. The best conversations I've ever had after doing a talk have been when somebody has taught me something. And that can only happen is if at some point in the talk or in the questions afterwards, I say those 3 words. And that's where the idea for this talk came about, was me finding the courage to say this. Because it's really hard to say those 3 words in that order. Really, really hard. And we're going to dissect some of the reasons why that's the case and hopefully give you some advice on how you can say it a little bit more. So pretty much what we're going to go through is why don't people say it, how you can say it with confidence, and the most important part of that, which is what do you say after the words I don't know. Because just saying the words by themselves isn't what we want to do. We want to say something afterward. And I know what you just said, Amy. You also know that that's not me, and I'm sorry. I don't like standing up here for 30 minutes and talking at you. I want this to be a dialogue, not a monologue, so I am going to ask you questions. If your answer is 1 or 2 words, just say it, and I'll just repeat it for the online audience. If it's more than 1 or 2 words, just wait for somebody to hand you a microphone. There will be some interaction with this. I encourage you to do that. Sorry. Not sorry. You're probably also wondering who I am. I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm a long-term father of a flock of chucks, or as we call them in England, chickens. Short-term father of a flock of humans, or as we call them in England, financial burdens. And I love traveling the world, seeing it, getting out there, which is why, as a POM, I ended up in Australia, because I just love seeing the world. I had a goal pre-COVID to visit 2 new countries every year. And I stuck that every year until COVID. 2023, I'm starting to make up for it. I visited 4 new countries in 2023, and I've already got 2 countries booked in this year to visit. So I'm getting back on it, and I'm getting there, because I just love seeing the world. I think everybody should just get out there and see as much of it as you possibly can. From a professional point of view, I started my career as a cold fusion developer. Whoa. Yeah, who knows cold fusion? Yeah, okay. So for those of you who don't know cold fusion, it's an XML-based programming language. Literally angular bracket, if, space, THEN equals, quote, expression. A programming language in XML. Somebody thought that was a good idea. It wasn't. So I didn't let that hold me back, and I became a VB6 developer. Didn't let that hold me back, so I became a PHP developer. That gets some groans. PHP is a great language if you don't care about anything to do with the quality of your code. Sorry. I think about PHP as like Objective-C. it's good enough to do the job, but when Swift came along, everybody just went, yeah, let's just use that thing. I've also been a leader for about 15 years at this point, probably 16 years, leading technology teams in various places, consultancies, SaaS product companies. And I really love this idea that as technologists, we can focus on the things that really make a difference. It's not just about building the thing right, it's about building the right thing. And for me, that's what leadership is. Leadership is helping a team understand what they're trying to do, why they're doing it, and then helping them do it. So I got into leadership really, really early, made a bunch of mistakes. By the time I was 24 years old, I had a team of 10 people. What 24-year-old knows how to be an employee, let alone a leader of employees? So I made a bunch of mistakes. That also led me into training and teaching people leadership skills. So that's what I do now. I do basically this kind of stuff for companies. I also have an online training platform called Tech Leaders Launchpad, which is basically online asynchronous video on demand training for all of this type of stuff for technology leaders, teaching you communication skills, teaching you influence skills, project management skills, all of that kind of stuff. It's fun, I love it, I love helping people. The happiest I ever am in my life is when you're explaining something to somebody and you can see the epiphany on their face. That makes me happy. That's what I get up for in the morning. Okay. These are 3 quotes. I'm not normally a fan of quotes, but I really like these because of the spread across history that these quotes evoke. We've got Plato, BC philosopher. I'm the wisest man alive, for I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. So Plato knew that saying I don't know is power. Shakespeare, the fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Shakespeare knew saying I don't know was powerful. I'd rather be happy than right any day. Slatty Bart Fast, otherwise known as Douglas Adams. So we've been knowing for centuries and millennia that saying I don't know is really, really important. So why don't we say it? Why do we not say these words? Whenever you see that, hand up, I told you this was not a monologue, it's a dialogue. Why don't people say this? Thank you. Bok? Fear. Fear of what? Yeah, that's a big part of it. Where do you think that fear comes from? What's that fear of embarrassment? What's the underlying driver of that? It always comes back to your parents. Primary school. Interesting. Why did you say primary school? So at school you learn that you get asked a question, if you don't know the answer, it can be a bit embarrassing for you. Yeah, Katie?
If you are a leader or you're somebody else there giving a talk, it immediately kind of negates everything you're doing.
Yeah.
And makes you look like you shouldn't have that position or shouldn't be talking in front of everybody else.
So there's this fear that if you're in a position of power, a position of authority, a position of knowing something, that if you crack that veil, if you show the certain chink in that armor, that everything that you just said just falls away. That's the fear. Yeah? Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. So I like to group these together into 2 groups. Ego, which is mostly internal to you. This is the way that we think about ourselves. And imposter syndrome, which is still internal, but the fear of the external belief of who you are. Both of these are fundamental to why we don't say this often enough. So ego, we kind of went through this a minute ago. This is this fear that I am the all-knowing person. I am the person that should know this stuff. I am the person that knows this stuff. And if I don't know the answer isn't worth knowing maybe, or if I don't know the answer, then your question is stupid. All of this stuff drives from this idea that we have to be this person who knows everything. But I think that ego is actually just imposter syndrome expressed in a different way. Because often when you look at things like Dunning-Kruger and the Peter Principle, the peak of ignorance, like all of this stuff is about who you are and the belief of who you are and how people look at you. And so ego and imposter syndrome are actually two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. Often what will happen is you will go through that curve of ignorance and you'll start off with ego, I am the all-knowing person, I know everything. You hit the peak of that and you slide down into imposter syndrome. And so I think those two are actually fundamentally the same thing. What I want to get you to at the end of this talk is to say this phrase, which is, I don't know. I'm an expert in my field, but I don't know that specific information. And we're going to go through how you do that now. So as an expert, say you're somebody who stood on a stage speaking to a bunch of people, or you're at a booth at a conference and somebody asks you a question, or you're trying to discuss with somebody and convince them a point of view at work, like you're the engineering manager. What might be some thoughts that go through people's minds as the expert that might make them think, I can't say the words I don't know? What are some of the thoughts that might go through people's minds? Why might they not want to say I don't know? Yeah, is my manager here watching me? Is there somebody who holds the keys to my promotion and pay rise listening and watching? Definitely. Anything else? Reputation, definitely, yeah. I want to be known as somebody that knows this stuff. They employ me to have the answers. That's a really, really powerful one. I know why people think that. I have a real problem with the way we interview people in our industry. The way we position job adverts. Must know React. Must know Swift UI. How many of you know Swift UI? How many of you know everything about Swift UI? One person. So what's the difference? The people that put their hand up first, who said they knew Swift UI, versus the people who didn't put their hand up, the second point, who knew everything about it. There's not really any difference. You can both do the jobs fine. We have this focus in our industry on knowledge acquisition, and we feel like our value as professionals is based on what we know, when it should be based on what we can do. Because what's the point of knowing something if you can't do something different after you know that thing? And so knowledge is not the end. Knowledge is a means to the end. And so if you ever have that thought that is, I should know this thing and I don't know this thing, remember that knowledge is not the goal. Knowledge is a tool. The goal is getting the job done. Knowledge is the tool to get there. And if you don't have the knowledge, 5 years ago, did you know Swift UI? So you didn't know it 5 years ago because it didn't exist.
That doesn't stop people from advertising must-have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, must have 5 years of Swift UI. So what happened between 5 years ago and 3 years ago? You learned it. Yeah, so this idea that there's this knowledge you don't have is something we just need to get over as an industry. It's like you're a professional, you learn things. We learn things all the time. And so focusing on what you know through job adverts and interviews and the way we think about ourselves as professionals, I think is fundamentally a problem with our industry. This is also a problem for boot camps, especially. I have a lot of people come out of boot camps and they have this idea in their head. I am a Ruby on Rails developer. No, you're not. You're a developer that knows Ruby on Rails. You see the difference between those two statements? If you've fixated in your mind that you are a Ruby on Rails developer, you're not going to be open to learn anything new. You're only going to apply to Ruby on Rails jobs. If you think of yourself as a developer that knows Ruby on Rails, then you might go, oh, hey, I want to learn Swift. I'll go apply for an iOS dev job and I'll learn. So this focus on what we know as opposed to what we can do is how you can get over that in your mind. Focus on your value to your employer, not on what you know, but what you can do for them. This is a great paraphrasing of something Richard Feynman said. Richard Feynman said, I can show you the difference between an expert and a fool. A fool will always have the answer to any question. Experts will admit they don't know. I will take that a little bit further. Real experts will be excited when they don't know something, because it's an opportunity to learn, it's an opportunity to fill in a gap and find connections. Like, have you ever learned one thing and then learned something else and then realized that actually two of the same thing, they're two expressions of the same thing? It's like when you learn a new language and you're like, oh, I now understand this other language better because I learned this language. Learning about functional programming. I have never written a functional program in my life, but learning about functional programming and the techniques and the tools and why they exist makes me a better object-oriented programmer because I understand those concepts. Who here works for a consultancy? Quite a lot of you. Why does the company that is paying for you, your client, why do they pay for you? To know things and to help them. Anybody want to give another answer?
They don't have the time to learn what you know.
Exactly. I want to change the way you think about that. Customers, clients, pay for consultancies for two reasons. Either capacity or capability. In non-MBA speak, knowledge or time. But what did we just express? We just expressed that 5 years ago, Bok didn't know Swift UI, and 3 years ago he did. So I would posit that capability knowledge is just a second order effect of capacity time. Your client is not just paying you for knowledge or time, they're actually only paying you for time. Because they could learn that stuff. They just don't have the time to learn that stuff. Or they'd rather put that time somewhere else. And so really what the clients are paying for is for you to learn it quicker than they can learn it. Either because you already know it, or because you're really smart, driven, got lots of connections, lots of support, and you can learn it quicker. So at the end of the day, even when you think you're being paid for your knowledge, you're not. You're being paid for your time. It's just your knowledge comes along with that, and your ability to learn new knowledge comes along with that. So clients don't expect you to have all the answers. They might say they do, but fundamentally, they just want you to solve their problem. And if solving their problem involves you learning something, just learn it. This is where the owners of consultancies, anybody? Yeah. This is where they might give me a frowny face and go, yeah, but you know, we don't want you to say that to the client. So there are some relationship dynamics and some things in here which we'll go through in a minute of how, you know, you might not necessarily want to say, yeah, you're going to pay me to learn that thing, because that can get you in some tricky water sometimes. So lastly, as a leader, what's the job of a leader of a team? Unblock your team. Yeah. Anybody else?
Serve your team.
Serve your team. Yep. Anybody else?
Deflect the manager.
Deflect the management bullshit, said as a manager. Yep. Know all the answers. Thank you for setting me up for a 4. Before we do that, Katie?
I was going to say guide your team. But I was thinking more finding it.
Yeah, guide your team to find the answers. Yeah, that's, as you probably guessed, that's the direction I'm going with this. There's this idea that as a leader, you're meant to have all the answers for your team, and that's just simply not the case. I see the job of a leader of a team as solving the problems for the team. But that might not necessarily mean you're the one who hands on the keyboard solves the problem. You don't need to solve the problem yourself, but you do need to ensure the problems get solved. And that different framing and different focus means that instead of you hands on keyboard solving the problem, you can point the way, you can inspire your team, you can enable them to solve the problems themselves. And that reframing of it's not necessarily, again, what I know, it's what I do, means that you can have this focus. Okay, so let's go through some examples. In these examples, you'll notice something. I'm not going to show you a slide that has 3 words on it, with the 3 words being I don't know. Because saying I don't know is the start of what I want you to do. The problem with saying I don't know and kind of just stopping is that it gives you nowhere to go afterwards. And what I want you to do, when you feel that desire, I want you to think about where you can go after you say the words I don't know. What the follow-on to that is, how that can start a new conversation as opposed to ending the current conversation. Because that's what our goal is. Our goal is not to end a conversation with I don't know, it's to start a new one. And here's some examples. Really, really simple. I don't know, but I'll find out and get back to you. So simple, so easy. You know, you're saying I don't know, you're giving them a solution to their problem, which is I'll get back to you. Really important. What's really important? Getting back to them. If you don't do that, you will lose trust with that person. And part of the power of saying I don't know is that doing it effectively builds trust. We fear that saying I don't know loses trust with somebody. But if you do it effectively, it actually builds trust. Because you're building a sense of empathy with you, you're building a sense of reliability, you're building a sense that you own who you are and what you do. And trust is weird. Trust is built in tiny little drops, but it is lost in cascades. So you need to say this kind of phrase 100 times to earn the currency to mess up once. Because it takes a lot to build up and is lost very, very quickly. So another thing we can do is, I don't know, but Jessica does. What's the power of saying that? What does that do when you say that phrase? Only do that if Jessica actually does. Yes. What else does it do? Empowers your team, yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're still owning the solution in the sense of making sure that the problem's getting solved. It's just you're saying, it's not going to be my hands that solve it, it's going to be Jessica's hands. What else? Sorry? Yeah, exactly. You're bringing that person that does have the answer, the real expert, to the stage and highlighting and spotlighting them and giving them their moment to shine and their moment to show who they are and what they can do. You know, if you take the spotlight all the time, your team notices it. They might not say it, but they notice it. I don't know, but I know someone who will, who might. I'll get back to you. This is kind of those two put together. This is, I don't know, and I think that person might know. So this is the point that was made of Jessica might not like it because she might not actually know. So if you don't know that Jessica knows, this is another way to say that. You're not dropping Jessica's name in it. You're not dropping Jessica herself in it. You're kind of going, I might know somebody who does. I'll get back to you. And again, what's really important about that? Getting back to them. If you make a promise to somebody, follow through with it. Even if you follow through and you say, sorry, they didn't know, I've got another solution for you. But you still need to get back to them. This is a great one for you as a leader. If you're a leader of a team, you're a staff engineer or a tech lead or lead consultant, this can turn a query from somebody who maybe has less experience than you into a coaching moment and actually helping step that person through the problem. Often if we're a staff engineer or a lead and somebody asks us a question, we feel like we've got to answer the question for them, and that can lead us into all that stuff we talked about earlier. But you don't always know the answers, and if you can show that person how you step through that, it can be really powerful, because the second order of this is, can you help me find out? Which is, let's own this problem together, let's step through it together. And this means that, as somebody who coaches and teaches for a living, I find it really hard when somebody, I charge a lot for one-on-one coaching. Nobody here asks me about one-on-one coaching. You do not want to pay how much I charge for it. But what that means is when somebody has a coaching session with me, they're paying a lot of money for that hour with me. I go into every single one of those coaching sessions terrified because of how much I'm charging. Which means that when they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, it's really hard for me to say, I don't know. And so learning how to do this stuff where it turns into a coaching conversation as opposed to a mentoring kind of prescriptive thing is something that I've had to practice again and again and again, because it terrifies me every time I have a coaching session. But this is something that applies in every single scenario if you're helping somebody as an expert. So wrapping up, and I like to do these talks where we have like a big long conversation at the end. So where to from here? How can you take what we've just discussed for the past 30 minutes and apply it in your day-to-day lives? I don't know. Let's talk about it in the Q&A. Thank you very much. If you want to learn more about me, that QR code on the right-hand side is my LinkedIn profile. I do regular fortnightly live streams. I've had charity majors, Scott Hanselman on there talking about all things technology leadership. If you want to know more about the professional side of me and the company, Tech Leaders Launchpad, that's the QR code on the left. The QR code in the middle is to book a 20-minute chat with me. I have put this QR code up, and literally thousands of people have seen it. Nobody has booked in 20 minutes with me. I can only assume that you think I'm going to spend those 20 minutes selling to you. That is not the case. I genuinely do this stuff because I want to help people. That 20 minutes, I will not sell to you at all. I genuinely want to help. So please, 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 I'm saying to you, I do want to help. If you have any questions about this topic, if you have any questions about tech leadership in general, I also, as something I do, not in my professional capacity, but in a personal capacity, I also help people find jobs in the industry. From doing what I do, I have a lot of connections to a lot of companies. And so I often, connect people when they're looking for jobs. So that's also something I can do in those 20 minutes. Please, please do it. I've literally thousands of people have seen it and nobody's done it. Cool. All right. Any questions that you wanna ask?
Perhaps a suggestion, but one of the ways of saying I don't know is that I found really useful is saying I don't know, but the first thing I would try is this, or that my first step would be this, because then you're giving somebody, because usually you know, like, oh, I might Google that first, or I might check this documentation first. So you're giving them a step that they might end up being able to solve it themselves, and they might try that step and come back to you and say, oh no, that didn't work, or I didn't find the answer. Like, okay, well then the next step I try is this. So you're teaching them as well, rather than giving them the answer.
That's great. I love
and even
that.
if you don't know, you can find out with them.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely excellent advice. Thank you.
That was a really good talk. I just want to add another I don't know thing at the end of it. I do a lot of talks like you do. I'm a trainer as well. And I actually find a lot of power, especially at conferences like this size or DevWorld size, where if you get asked a question and you're on the stage and you're like, I don't know, there's a lot of power in going, hey, does anyone here do this? Like, because at that point, someone else who actually could be an expert in that area that maybe has done that, you then learn something, the audience learns something, and then you're an expert who is able to facilitate that in a room full of experts. It's my power move. I absolutely love it. So I just want to add that in there for other people who are doing conference talks or doing talks or training, whatever it is. I think it's really useful.
Amazing. Yeah, like learning by asking and crowdsourcing, really powerful. Thank you.
I love that talk. I got heaps out of that. Thank you. Bad faith questions and questioners. So you don't see it a lot, especially like a context like this. People are really nice, but I've seen it in like academia, right? So I don't know. You've given a talk and that hand shoots up, and they're not asking a question because they want the answer. In fact, they probably know the answer they want to hear. So I don't know, they've got ulterior motives. Maybe they, you do research in their area and they don't like your research, whatever. I know what my question is, but
how to deal with
thoughts
those?
on that? Like, does this stuff work, or how should you handle that?
Sure. I'm somebody who, for a living, teaches soft skills to software developers. I get a lot of that. People who genuinely do not believe, like they're not even being argumentative, they just genuinely don't believe that being a better communicator makes you a better software developer. And their company has sent them along to a training course that I run, and so I have to deal with that a lot. A lot of people in like a meetup environment like this or a conference environment, you're kind of self-selecting the talks that you go to, so there's a lot less of that. But in my corporate training stuff, yeah, there's a lot. Making sure that you strike the line between acknowledging and validating their point of view. Those are two different things. Acknowledging that they feel the way they do versus acknowledging that their point of view is correct is the line to strike, and kind of deflecting a little bit and going, let's talk about that afterwards, let's discuss that, let's debate that, let's find a forum, that's something that we can discuss in depth, but let's do that another time. Like, those are the ways to do it. It is really tricky. There's no secret sauce to it. People often come up with bad faith arguments, and the trick is just not to engage and to find a way to disengage without disrespecting. Because who knows, that person might hold a lot of thought leadership in that group. And by disrespecting them, you've suddenly lost the rest of the room. So, deflect without disrespecting. Any other, by the way, I like these thoughts on saying things I don't know afterwards. It doesn't have to be a question. If you want to feed into this, please do.
One question, you spoke a lot about how we can learn to say I don't know ourselves, but how do you suggest we encourage the team that we're with to not be afraid to say no? Yeah,
a big part of that comes from modeling the behavior yourself. The be the change you want to see, and talking about it. I think there's huge power in talking about why you're doing the things you're doing, and just literally saying, I want to learn to be better, and I want to get better at this thing, so I am going to make a concerted effort to say I don't know more. And just saying that as part of what you're doing as your day-to-day job, being the change you want to be and advocating it is really powerful. All of this stuff also comes from psychological safety and the ability to, psychological safety is not wrapping people in cotton wool. If you came along to the talk that I did a few months ago, I did a talk on conflict and the difference between unhealthy and healthy conflict. We don't want to completely eradicate conflict from our workplaces. Good conflict is good. Healthy conflict is good. But there's a difference between unhealthy and healthy conflict, and this is analogous to here. If you've got the psychological safety to have healthy conflict, you've probably also got the psychological safety to say, I don't know, more often.
Yeah, just going back to what you said before about validating someone's opinion and acknowledging it, I like to use the line of like, cool, I can see how you might think that. This might seem counterintuitive, but here's why you're wrong. I think what you said was incredibly important to not to shut down bad actors in a meeting situation, but just to make them feel like they're not alone in thinking, or they're not alone in their current state, their mindset of why they're thinking like that, and not alone in their current journey of learning to the path of enlightenment that you've done previously because you know the answer. So I love that. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I think one slight change I'd make, that phrase, I can see why you might think that. That's been said so often now that people immediately see it as a dismissive statement.
Yeah, that's fair.
So like, although, a few years ago, that would be the phrase that I would have used, I deliberately don't use that phrase now because it has been used so often that people immediately take it as dismissive. I might say something along the lines of, that's a commonly held belief.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice.
One thing I learned a while back, and I try and do it all the time, is anytime I'm tempted to say but, almost always say and instead, right? I see why you think that. A lot of people think that. And one of the things
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to add to about the leadership saying I don't know, as I'm at the moment learning to say I don't know, still not very good in this, but it really helps that my direct leader saying I don't know really helps, because Bok is very good in this. He always say I don't know. But not always. I mean, if he
that doesn't surprise
doesn't know,
me.
But that it really helps. It I feel safe in that environment. That all the leadership above me saying I don't know. But what they usually say, my guess is, and they elaborate on their guess. And I don't remember if they say, but I think they say in the end, like, if anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, that's another way to say I don't know, but my guess is this and that, and if anybody knows, please correct me.
Yeah, I think that's something you can definitely do. The caveat or the caution I would say with that approach is the power dynamics can make that not the right approach if there's huge disparity between the two people. Like if you had, for example, a junior engineer and the CEO of the company, if the CEO goes, I don't know, but I think blah, 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 what do you think? The junior engineer is going to go, great, boss. So when you have a low power disparity and a huge amount of trust between those people, perfect approach, definitely do that. If there's huge power disparity or a lack of trust, maybe don't. Are there any online questions? I don't want to. No. Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much, everybody.
Alrighty. Hi everyone. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak at CocoaHeads. For those who already know me, you might have noticed I'm wearing quite a few Android things tonight. I had to come and troll, you know. I'm a Google developer expert. My name's Katie. I'm usually speaking at GDG, so this is a new place for me to speak. But everybody's very friendly, hopefully, and won't take me up on the technical aspects. But luckily, I'm not going to actually talk about Android tonight. Happy to do that another time, but or we can debate the merits of various platforms. But tonight, I'm actually going to do a talk about technical blogging. So technical blogging is something that I do quite a lot, and because I like to share my knowledge and help other people. And so it's something that I think it's quite easy to get into. It's scary, but if you know some of the tips, it's something that you can get started with. So before I start, anybody here write technical blogs at all? A couple of people? Awesome. Be cool at the end to see if some of these tips resonate with you or if there are other ones that you might like to share. So let's get straight into it. Is this working? Nope. Let's try that again. There we go. So why might you want to do blogging? It's a really low-stress way of sharing your knowledge. You don't have to get up here and speak. You don't have to present something in real time. You can sit at home in your cave under your doona and write a technical blog. You can also spend 4 weeks writing it, and it doesn't matter. It can be really low stress. You can start and stop. You don't like the idea, you can throw it out and try another one. It should not be stressful. It can give you a 2 for the price of 1 when you're writing a talk as well. If you do like public speaking, you can write a talk and you can write a blog post at the same time. A lot of my talks, I have 1 or 2 blog posts that go with the same talk. So you've already prepared the technical code, you've already prepared the ideas, you've already put your ideas together. You might as well save time and produce 2 items of content for the same effort. And you'll reach different people by each of those different methods. Some people like coming to listen to talks, other people like reading things online. So you'll get both those types of people. And it gives you something to share in the future. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh, how do I do this thing? You're like, it's all good. I've written a talk on it. You can send them the link and then you can go back on with your day. It's also something to share with your future self. The number of times I've Googled the answer to a problem and got my own blog post in return. It's ridiculous. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that myself, whoops. And then I just go and find my own examples. And it really helps if you want to become like a developer advocate. So you get a promotion, get a new job. If you can point to blog posts you've written during the interview process, you can say, here's something I've written. It's a really good way of showing someone that you've been able to organize your thoughts, you've been able to do something technically really well, but you were able to communicate that and communicate the way to solve a problem. So there are lots and lots of blog posts out there. I went and had a look at just one day on Medium. There were so many I could find. And there's some that I've written as well here. These are all Android ones. Lots of companies write blog posts as well, in things like for their news. People write them to help you get a new job, that sort of thing. Lots of other ones here. Again, more company announcements and things like that. There's lots of different things out there. And so you might think to yourself, there's so much out there. How can I come up with something new myself? How can you bring that new idea? And you might think to yourself, but I'm not an expert. Who wants to listen to me? Who wants to spend the time reading something that I've written? And what if you get something wrong? What happens then? And this might seem really overwhelming for you. So a little secret is that I ask all these questions of myself as well. And I'm sure all the other people who do blogging and also technical talks in this room would ask those same questions of themselves. And like anything, it begins with a first step. So for me, the first step is to come up with that title. Oh, so come up with a topic first, actually. So what do you want to write about? Is it something exciting that you've been working on? some cool new technology that you hear, a bug or a problem you've solved, or something you've Googled recently. Often for me, it's when I've Googled the answer to a question, found a Stack Overflow post, but that's the only resource online, and you're like, well, that's poorly written, you know, I could write something better than that. So it's something that you've been Googling and you haven't found many resources for, or maybe you've only found the official documentation and that doesn't give you a full example, but you've been able to solve that problem. That's a perfect thing to write a blog post about. But you want to make it interesting. So you need a problem and a solution, generally. You can do a deep dive into technology. You could compare two things. You can be really controversial if you want to. You could have a step-by-step guide, you know, how to integrate something from scratch. You can share your opinion. Even if something's really well documented, what people want to hear is, how did it work for you? What were the problems and the solutions that you found? You can write lists like, you know, top 5 things you should know about a particular technology. And you want to tell a story. You want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So some tips for topics. Single topic, single idea. Often when you start writing a blog post, you're like, oh, and I can include this example, and what about this? And before you know it, your blog post is more like a novel. Cut it down, single idea, single topic. You want sort of no more than a 6-minute read, something like that. Medium does tell you how long something will take to read. You don't want this to be long. A lot of like newsletters and publications will also not accept it if it's too long. And you can go with a blog series. So if you find that you're like, oh, and there's this example and this example, or these 2 ways of using the API, think to yourself, okay, we're getting too long. Let's do part 1, part 2, part 3. And that's totally okay. It also helps you break that up and make them all into smaller, more manageable pieces. And you get more pieces of content out there. And it does not need to be advanced. Sometimes the best blog post I've read is from somebody who's learning something, and they're like, right, to integrate this from scratch, you know, I do these steps. Or as a new developer, this is what I found about this particular API. You don't have to be an expert. All you have to do is talk about what you've experienced, and that could still be something beginner. And don't forget to include your personality and your point of view. Like, people want to hear what you found difficult, what you found easy, and what sort of use cases you've used this thing for. Because they can't get that from the documentation. The documentation usually is just pretty dry and says, you know, this is how you do this, this is how, you know, include this, import, whatever. It doesn't actually show, like, this was tricky to find this piece out, or you notice some performance issues in this area. People want to see how it's worked for you. And this is what differentiates your blog post from that documentation, is that personality, that personal experience, those contexts. And so the real first step for me is crafting that title, is how to get that thing that will attract people's attention. So when you're thinking about a title and subtitle, you want to consider how you might search for that content. Like, what type of things are you typing in when you were originally finding information out about this topic? How might you put your title so that your blog post will appear in that list? And don't go super clickbaity. I see so many times people are like, oh, the, you know, really controversial title. Yeah, it's fun, but you really want to make sure that users understand, or readers understand, what you're talking about. You can maybe play a little bit with words, which I do occasionally to attract readers, but don't, you know, try and be super controversial. One good way of thinking about it is the title can be the what and the subtitle can be the why. So that you're sort of breaking it up so that people can read the title, and then there's like another underline saying, oh, this is the why we care about this. Or you can also go with something that the title is fun, but the subtitle is then clear about what you're talking about. Again, that can help with attracting readers. So coming up with that title and first paragraph, that's usually the hardest part for me. So often I use Bard and ChatGPT, except I'm a Google developer expert, so I can't really talk about ChatGPT. And now Bard is called Gemini, so I'm going to say Gemini to the rescue. But you know, use your generative AI of choice here. So one of the things I often do when I'm starting to write a blog post is I use generative AI to get some ideas on what I could use as a title, because it's always the hardest part to get going. So I was writing one about Jetpack Compose. I know a bad word here, but I had a very generic thing, title about blog post about styling lines. The generative AI gave me a whole bunch of different examples. I wanted to add a metaphor to make it a bit more fun, Morse code in this case. So I asked it for that. They were all too long, so I asked for shorter. And I really liked one of those options. And so then I tweaked it myself. And that's the key part, is if you are going to use generative AI to help you with writing different topics or coming up with ideas, you need to actually think about it. You can't just copy and paste. You need to kind of come up with the idea yourself and tweak it from there. So in that particular title, I had something fun at the start with my metaphor, my Morse code metaphor. So that was something fun. Then mastering lines. So this is the what are we trying to do? We're going to talk about lines. And then Jetpack Compose, that really helps with searching and SEO, and again tells the reader what they're going to be reading about. And also with path effect. So this was the specific API that I was talking about. So in this title, I've tried to get the reader's attention, make it a little bit fun, but also tell them exactly what they're going to be reading. So when they see this in a search result, they're going to say, yep, I'm really interested in path effect. This sounds like the blog post I want to read. And so for me, it's so much easier when I have a title. Once I've got a title, yeah, okay, I can start writing the blog post. And if it comes really naturally to you, then just start writing from there. Yeah, you're all good right away. But if it doesn't come naturally, there's a few other steps you can take. Often I start from the middle. Like I might just go, okay, I don't know what the first paragraph's going to be, but I know what the conclusion's going to be, so I'll start writing that first. Or you can add your code examples and then just start explaining them. That's another really good way, because usually you have those code examples. Put those in, start putting some words around them, explain those, and you'll start to build out the rest of the post. You can get some help from Gemini or AI, and you can always replace it later, which is something I often do. So however you start, you need to find your voice, the voice that works for you. So an example here, again, I used generative AI for this. Asked for an open paragraph, gave me a bunch of options, and the key was that there was lots of different ways of writing. So you can go with something that's technical and informative, or really engaging, or mysterious. And this is where you come in, where you need to think, how do I want to sound in this blog post? How do I want to feel? So in this particular example, I picked one that I kind of liked, then tweaked it a bit, ended up meshing them together a bit. And but the thing is that you need to work on it yourself. And so a little secret about this, often I scrap the AI version after I've written the rest of the article. But it helps me get that first few words on the page. It's always really hard to write something if all you're looking at is a blank white screen with that little cursor that's blinking out there saying, type some words in now. So having something that you can just dump in there to get that blank white screen away and then start filling in around that can really help. And then I go back and I just delete the original AI-generated stuff because it doesn't really feel authentic to me once I've gone and written the rest of the content. So finding your voice. Do you want to be strictly informative? Fun or dry? Controversial? You can use words like I, we, you. I tend to use we and you, or that sort of thing. You can use past tense, present tense, future tense, which would be entertaining. But most of all, you want to think about what you like to read. What sort of voices in blog posts? And if you start thinking about it and having a look at a bunch of different posts, you'll see that some resonate more than others. What do you like to read? And how do you like to teach something if you're teaching something to somebody else? So if you think about when you're writing, imagine your colleague is sitting next to you or your friend and you say, this is how I would explain this code to you. What sort of words might you use? Would you be super technical, or would you be more non-technical and easier for them to understand? So what are the things that I prefer? So I tend to go with a real conversational feel. I mentioned I like we and you, and I generally go with present tense, like the next thing you need to do is do this. And the most important thing is consistency. So the words you use and the tenses you use, you need to keep throughout the whole article. Different articles can have different voices, but you need to keep that through the same article. And this is where people who write their whole blog post using generative AI have problems. And that's a bit of a warning on that. Don't write all your content using AI. You can really tell because people jump around their voices. And you can say, oh, yep, that was written one section, that was written something else, and somebody joined it together here. So you really want to make sure that even if you're using some of these tools, that you make sure you've reworded it in something that feels authentic to you and that flows. You can use it as inspiration and modify and iterate yourself. All right, so let's talk about the actual content. Takes a while to explain. So tips for writing that actual content. Often I write out those headings first. Think about beginning, middle, and end. You're telling a story. Create the code examples and fill in around them, as I mentioned before. Don't be afraid to add your experiences. And definitely share your source code link if you can. So often, I work in a proprietary code base. I can't share the source code, but I'll create examples in a dummy project that I can then share, so that people can go and see how this all fits together, but I don't have to share any of my proprietary code. And just as Andrew was saying before, if you don't know something, share it. So an example that I have from this is just sharing my source code up here. Just a GitHub link is pretty easy to see. And then in this particular post, I just decided to ignore a whole part of the API. I looked for examples on this particular part of the API, could not find it, did not know how to use it, tried, failed. So I just was honest in my post and just said, I don't know how to use this. If I find some examples, quite happy to write a separate post. And yeah, try to ask people actually, if you see a good example, please share it. Nobody has. I don't think anybody uses this API. And I said at the bottom here, hopefully one day I'll come back with a part 2 just for that one. So don't also try and use big words or really flowery language. It's completely okay to use just normal speaking language. You don't have to sit there and put all the fancy formal words in there so you sound super knowledgeable. People don't care, and it won't sound authentic for you. And just something on language and grammar, make use of tools you have available to you. Spell check. Grammarly is another good tool you can use, especially if English is not your first language. It can be really helpful. Ask a friend or a colleague to pre-read for you. I've done this quite a lot. I think Ash was here a minute ago. Yeah, I know you've read some of my posts. Keep it really simple. It's easier to read it rather than sounding smart. And take your time, and nobody gets it perfect the first time. So if you have to pass it to a friend or colleague to read, and then they give you a whole bunch of feedback, that's great. Have another crack and then send it back to them. Any better, Try a different colleague if you didn't like the answers the first one gave you. It works. I tried giving it to my parents. They've got no idea. Some stuff about images. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, of course. This is really weird, this thing. I keep seeing half images on both these screens. It's really strange. So images, screenshots of your UI, always the best way. You're showing an example of what you're producing. Diagrams are really useful. I use lots of tools to create diagrams. Stock images, of course. AI-generated images are a really good option right now. Here's some examples. So, screenshots, diagrams, stock images. This was a nice one I did for dependency management. I decided a garden was more fun than, I don't know, whatever dependency management in an image would look like. And this was an AI-generated one that I made. So some key considerations you need to think about with images. Ensure the images you're using are royalty-free and that you're allowed to use them. and as high quality as you can, because you want to make sure that it looks really good on people's screens. You don't want a super large image in terms of pixel dimensions, but you want to make sure at least it's high quality, not fuzzy. And you can consider feature images and search thumbnail dimensions. If you've used Medium as a blogging platform, which is what I use, you can actually, with your feature images, a particular size you generally need, and you can set the focus position so that when it's cropped for search results, it'll focus in on the part of the image that is the most relevant. That's something good to play around with. Make sure you attribute all images. Even if you have an image that doesn't require attribution, put the attribution in. Even if, think about you as a photographer taking a photo, you say it's okay, you can use it. It'd be really nice still to see your link there or your name there. And especially, I attribute AI generated images as well, even though we don't really need to. I'm like, this is produced by Adobe or this is produced by Gemini, because I figure at least people then know that I've used that tool. And if it's something weird, at least I can point to that. It's not my art skills. Losslessly compress your images and resize them where you can. I'll talk about GIFs in a moment. I especially had a problem with this when using a lot of GIFs in an article. They just took forever to load, and I submitted it to a publication and they said, oh, you don't have any images in here. What's going on? There's all these big empty spaces. And what it was that my GIFs were massive and just took forever to download. Yes, minimize the GIFs that are only there for amusement. So I see a lot of blog posts that are full of cat GIFs or funny memes. Look, it's okay if it's appropriate for the topic, but I would probably only go with like maybe one of them if it was a really funny point to be made. But an article full of these every paragraph, reading it, you just get tired and you're like, oh, I don't want to see that. I actually want to read the content. So only include the ones that really make a point. And maybe one at the top, but I wouldn't go more than that. With your screenshots and demos, you can screen record your video, convert it to a GIF, and then you can resize and compress. An example here, I had a pull to refresh example, and I thought I just don't want a normal list screen that just says, oh, list is updated. Instead, I found an API that had really cute pictures of foxes. It was a lot more interesting for people to look at. I generally resize my screenshots and screen recordings to about 360 pixels, reduce the frame rate where you can, try to make them fun. Here's a bunch of tools. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are a lot of these I use, especially for GIFs. I recommend EasyGIF and compressing Image Optim, but there's a whole bunch out there. Always happy to find new ones as well. Feature images, I mentioned those before. Eye-catching for search engines. You want to set the mood at the top of the article. You want to make sure people are like, okay, this is where we're at, this is the type of post we're going to read. Try and make them related to the blog post in some tangible way. It can be a GIF as well, but remember on search results, you probably will only get the first frame. I've seen people before, especially when they put a GIF up that's sort of a bit memey, the first frame may not be what they think it is. Think about the platform aspect ratio, again, medium, that's usually what the feature image size is, and adjust that focus point whenever you can. Some examples I've got, this one was for shades of grey, so I set the mood with a nice grey rose. This one here, that was directly related to content. These annotations were important to my content. And then there's the cute fox again, just because it's cute. I think this one has done really well in search results just because everyone's like, oh, cute fox. Code examples. This is the most important thing in a technical blog. What are you trying to show? So for example here, sorry guys, Jetpack Compose code, but we want to make it minimal and to the point. So I could include this whole thing here, but you don't need to know all of that for what I'm talking about. Instead, I can cut it down here. You can use things like these little dots just to say, oh, there's some code in this section, but you don't need to know about it for this particular topic. And that way people know, okay, this is where it would sit in situ, but I don't need to include everything, because you just have to scroll down and find the exact code you're interested in. When I'm putting code in GitHub gists, always be really clear about the file name of your code, because often people might put something, if you're not clear where it would exist, people might put it in the wrong architecture component, like they might put it in a view, a layout code rather than a view model or something like that. So it's really important to try and be clear what's going on here. Same with variable naming and function naming. Again, be clear. You might in a production app use something that has some acronyms in it or might make more sense for your team, but if you're writing for an external audience, be really clear about what is this variable, because they're looking at this without any extra information. Where you can and your language allows it, use things like argument names. So it's really clear what values you're putting in where. Especially this helps if the API changes. And I've seen this before where the API slightly changed, an extra parameter's been added or removed, and then somebody comes and sees your blog post and they're like, oh, you've put false here and true here. Which ones do these refer to? So if it's possible, do this. And show a journey. Show step 1, step 2, step 3. So start with simple, get easier. Or what I've seen before, start with complex and simplify. Formatting is really key. I use GitHub just for anything that's over 2 lines because you get that syntax highlighting, and it also sits really nicely. People can go and view it in the gists. They can copy it, they can fork it, they can do all sorts of things to it, and it looks a lot better. And be really careful about code that runs off the side, because then people have to scroll horizontally, and that's no fun. So try and put things on new lines if you can. If it makes sense to, and maybe cut down your code so that it doesn't need to run onto multiple lines. Oh, what have I got here as well? Indentation is really important as well. Just depending on where you copy it from, sometimes the indentation is really large. Reduce it if you can. That way people can read more. Use backticks as well for your code. So you can put code in line with the text. So I've got some examples here, using some different ones for variable names, things like that, API pieces of code. If you see here this example with 2 lines of code, it's kind of hard to read. I can see what's going on here, but any more than this, I would probably put it in a gist, because it's breaking over the lines and it's harder to see and harder to understand what's a variable, what's an argument name, that sort of thing. And always follow up with a GitHub link. Attribution. So not just talking about images here, talking about your inspiration. So you can use other people's work as your inspiration. I've done it many times with my work. I've read somebody else's blog post, I've seen somebody else's Stack Overflow post, and I'm like, that's cool, but I could do it better. You can link to those official docs or other blogs, and say you use them to solve the problem. I've even had people as well that I've linked to their Stack Overflow post, and that person has responded to me saying, oh, thanks for actually crediting me with the answer. In that particular instance, I'd used their answer and then expanded on it. And they're like, oh, that's great, I can expand on my Stack Overflow post. So we sort of had a bit of a dialogue there. And think about what you would want if somebody was using your code. When in doubt, attribute. And yeah, as I said before, I kind of attribute AI as well, because one day we might have to, I don't know. Attribute your graphics in a caption, the bottom. Like for example, for those fox images, I said the fox images found via this random fox. Code was used in this post was inspired by Stack Overflow. There's another one, I just stole this person's heart path, like it was a path of lines. Because I couldn't be bothered writing it myself, just credited them for it. And yeah, here's this one I was talking about before where I actually expanded on somebody else's work. And so now, the finishing touches. Review, review, review. Spell check, definitely spell check. Grammar check, I mentioned Grammarly before. Ask those friends and colleagues to review. I always sleep on it and then read it and submit it the next day, because sometimes the next day when you read it, you're like, actually, I've missed out a whole sentence there. I've missed out a few words, or this example doesn't make sense anymore. And you can update after publishing. I published a blog post last week that's actually done really well. And somebody messaged me and said, actually, we're going to change the API, and what you've written, it's good, but it's not quite right. So I just went and changed it. I put a little note at the top saying, I've now since found out some more information. I've updated the post below. I've done it with some of my other ones where either I've made a spelling error or made a slight factual error. I've just gone and fixed it. Sometimes commented on that fix, or other times just fixed it with, behind the scenes. So how do you go about building an audience for readers? You could add it to a publication. So with Medium, if you don't already know, you can publish under your own name. You can also submit it to a publication. And often they have social media behind them or a following behind them, which will enable you to get more eyes on your posts. I do this. You can get it added to a newsletter or digest. If there's something that you read that sends you a digest in your particular technological space, how do you submit articles to that? And that's a really good way of building your audience. Make use of those platform tools like SEO, so think about what keywords you want, tags, all those sorts of things. Share on all your social medias. Your work Slack, CocoaHeads Slack, GDG Slack, share it everywhere you can. And interact with your audience via the comments. If somebody has asked you a question, respond to them. They might become a frequent reader, or you might be able to learn something from them. If somebody's asked something challenging, say, oh, that's great. Do you have a source for that? And then they might have a blog post that you can read and you can learn. Which platform to choose? Where are your readers reading? So for me, especially in the Android space, Medium is where it's at. Pro Android Dev is where it's at for the publication, so that's where I publish. But think about your technological space. Is there a different place you can publish? You can create your own website and publish your blog post on your own website, but then it's on you for getting the word out there in the social media. I see a lot of people cross-post on their own website and also Medium or other tools like that. Think about what works for you and where your readers are. How can you boost your search ranking? There's a whole lot of tools you can use for that, especially if you are writing on your own blog post or your own website, sorry. Those publication digests, super useful. How do you get on those is where to look. And where is it easy for you to write? I write straight in the Medium editor. I'm used to that now. It makes sense to me. It's convenient. I used to write on a Google Doc and then copy it across, but then I'd have to copy my code examples across, and I have to do the reformatting, and it never quite felt right. So have a think about what makes sense for you. I know people as well who like to handwrite things and then type it into a tool or scan it in. Think about what makes it easy. You don't want to have too many steps between you and getting the post published, because if you have too many steps, you'll fail at one of those early steps. Like if you put it in a Google Doc, you think, yep, I'm done, I'll publish that later, and then you totally forget about it. You want to make sure that as soon as you finish writing it, you can publish it immediately. Make sure the platform has the features. So for example, code embedding, the SEO, all that sort of stuff. So if you are using your own personal website, make sure you've got all the features you need in order to have something that looks really engaging and can format your code and format your text really well. This is something I've been thinking about, the content longevity and the ownership. As I mentioned, I post on Medium and Pro Android Dev. I do kind of wonder what happens if Medium dies. Where do my posts go? I periodically export them, which kind of gives you like a PDF of them. So at least I could type them into something again or copy and paste. It'd be annoying, but I could do that. I did try and write a tool to download Medium and upload it as Markdown so I could put it on my website, but that didn't work. But this is something to think about, is if it's important to you, the ownership and the content longevity, have a think about this before you make your publishing choice. There's also the big question, is it something that you want to make money from? Personally, I don't, because I like to read free blog posts to share knowledge. But some people do like to make money. And what I would say to that is have a look at the platform first and look at what average people earn who do try and make money from those platforms. Usually it's pretty small. Is the effort that you're going to earn that money and the reduced readers who actually pay for content worthwhile? But if you earn $1, maybe you could use that content somewhere else to help you get a better job or something like that. which instead might pay for itself, something like that. So a word of warning, writing a blog post does take a lot longer than expected. You think, okay, 6-minute read. Oh, surely it's only going to take me 6 minutes to write. Oh, maybe it'll take double the amount of time, so 12 minutes to write. Oh, I'm going to write some code, that's probably a few more minutes. Before you know it, you've been writing this thing for like 3 hours, and half of that was writing the code examples, or half of it was spent on formatting. It's all in those really little things. You know, the actual text I generally can bang out in about 15 minutes, but it's putting the code in the right way, finding an image, making sure everything looks really nice, rereading a bunch of times. It does take a lot of time. So if you are going to get into this, allow for that. And then you can hit that big, big publish button. Any questions? If you want to go find my Medium posts down there, or you can find my website.
You touched on maintenance, but how do you feel about maintenance of really old things where you might have written something 2 years ago, but it's no longer the way to do it? Do you take it down? Do you amend it? Or, yeah.
I've got a couple of blog posts which I now know are very out of date. But for these particular ones, I'm like, nobody's going to be searching that, so I don't care. For some of the more recent stuff that still get a lot of readers, I tend to maintain those. But you can kind of have a look at how well posts are doing. If something's getting like 1 reader a month or something, then don't care. I think if it was something that was now controversial that's wrong, maybe yes, you could take it down, especially if you wouldn't want somebody associating those previous ideas with you. But really, the internet is large. There's a lot of old stuff on there. There's a date on there.
Are there any more questions? Yep. Do you write in a professional capacity for your company as well as your personal, and how do you decide which content goes where?
So that's an interesting one for me, because I have my professional company. I also, as a GDE, I need to produce content as a GDE to maintain being a GDE. And so at Billu, where I work, we've got a Medium blog post. Being a GDE, there's a Google Developers publication. And then there's also Pro Android Dev, which is not technically associated with a company. I tried all 3 of those. Pro Android Dev, I got a hell of a lot more readers. So that's where I post, where I'm going to get the readers. If I was working on something that was related to my job in terms of talking about a client or talking about something specific that might be used as a client reference or a business case, I'd put it on the one that's related to my, my company. Probably not even on the Medium one, I'd probably put it on the website. But for the other stuff that's sanitized away from my client work, where I don't mention what I do and where I've made a specific example project, and especially as the blog posts I write out of hours. I publish them where I feel like. If I was being tasked to write it for work and during work hours, I probably would put it on a work property. But completely depends.
Any other platforms you recommend besides Medium, like for iOS?
To be honest, it's really the only one I've tried, other than my personal website, which gets no traffic. I've seen different ones for different technology spaces. So like Blogger, I think. There's a few other ones which, if you read a lot into a technology space, you'll see the same platforms coming up. And then those are the ones I would pick. I don't know what other technology uses.
That's a really good talk. A question around metrics for people who like coming and reading your blog and stuff like that. Do you do much with those metrics? Do you sort of go, oh wow, this post is really blown up, I'll do a follow-on from it? Do you find out the reason why that happened? Do you try to funnel people to your website? Like, do you do anything from that, from what you're learning from what Medium gives you?
So as a developer advocate, GDE, I need to record those metrics. And they care about reads more than views. And so there's a big difference there. Some of my blog posts have massive numbers of reads, massive numbers of views, but not reads. So I tend to look at those and say, okay, why are people loading this page but never actually reading to the end? And I don't know how Medium calculates that and how the various platforms calculate that, but there must be a reason. So, and that might be, maybe I've used the wrong title, something like that, where people are getting there, they're like, actually, no, that's not what I want. And what's turned them off? some of the ones I have written that have done really well, I have absolutely no idea why they've done really well. Some of them I know have been picked up by a newsletter digest, and then I'm like, oh, okay, so that's why that one's done really well. And I think others because I've just picked the right title. Yeah, and I think it's just a matter of like what you feel that you can write content with. I wouldn't try and force writing a part 2 unless you are actually passionate about that part 2, because then it just feels hollow. Maybe spend your passion writing something new. But definitely if there's a topic that seems to resonate, and also if it's a topic that there's not much out there, it's a good focus point.
Got time for one last question?
Sneaked in. Thank you for that. As we were I have a real problem with long blog posts, and I was just, as you were doing that talk, I was looking at the length of some of mine. 18.6 minutes, 19.2 minutes, 23.8 minutes. I think the reason why I'm doing that is because I want somebody to really get value from investing the time into it. And I can't seem to shake that idea that people will get more value from a smaller blog post because they'll actually read it. What advice would you give me?
So is break up the topics. So even this talk, I mean, I know I ran through it at a massive speed because I was very worried about the end time today. I probably could have turned this particular talk into probably about 8 blog posts. I did have a look once about the different topics I cover. You need to break it up. It is totally okay to have part 1, this small bit, part 2, this small bit, part 3, this small bit. That way, if you've got somebody who absolutely wants to get that value out, they can click from page to page. Totally fine. Or somebody who's looking for that specific thing can jump into that halfway point. There's a blogger that I like reading. He writes totally off-the-wall things. He did a multi-part series on a particular person. He then produced a PDF of that series because it ended up being like a good hour read or something. It ended up being a bit of a mini book. So you have those options as well. You can provide at the top of the article, for anybody who likes long form content, here's a PDF, read it on your Kindle. Or for anybody who wants to step through, here are the steps. And I think if it's more than one idea, you need to break it up. And you'll get more pieces of content and more readers probably.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for sorry, I should have had some more water before getting up here and speaking. Oh well. 2 really amazing talks tonight. First was Andrew about how do we say, I don't know. And I guess my favourite version of that is, I don't know, but let's find out together, because it actually sort of brings the other person in and shows that, hey, we both want to know the answer to this. Really good. And then Katie's talk about hacks for writing blog posts. Again, like a whirlwind tour of what is good writing style, how do you engage with an audience, and a lot of really amazing tips in there. So thank you to both our speakers for this evening. Okay, so now the more formal side, which is what we have coming up this month. We've got the coding night next week. Bring along your resume or your code or your blog post, or just come and hang out and chat and talk. It's a really good event. It's alcohol free, so no actual sort of, I've lost my word. Yep, there's no need to drink or anything there, and it's an all ages, very inclusive event. There's people from the iOS community, the Android community, there's web developers there as well. So it's a great event. The social night is where we just unwind and relax and have a bit of fun. And I have brought the curse of the faulty video to Pat's laptop. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll speed this up. Social night, end of the month on the 28th. Should be a lot of fun. This will be the one before WWDC, so lots of speculation, lots of rumours. Just come, hang out. Again, no obligation to drink, but people will be drinking. These events can't happen without our sponsors. So Mantle Group, whose office we're in today, they're one floor up and we're using the auditorium. And REA Group, again, long-time sponsor, and we are very thankful for their support. Now, even though a lot of you are here for DevWorld as well, and that's 2 full days remaining of talks, a few of us will be heading out to a venue nearby, which will be the Mitre Tavern. So if you'd like to continue socialising and chatting and just engaging with everyone, please join us. There will be groups leaving from here. It's a very short walk away. Okay, that is all for this evening. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you DevWorld next week at Hack Night, Social Night, or at the venue afterwards.